The school bell rang, signaling the start of another day at Riverside High. Emma stepped off the bus, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. It was her first day at this new school, and everything felt unfamiliar. The tall brick building towered over her, like a giant that loomed over her every step. She tugged at the straps of her backpack, trying to calm the nervousness that bubbled up inside her. Emma had just moved to the area, and she didn't know anyone here. Her mom had gotten a new job, which meant a new home, a new school, and a new life. It was a lot to take in, and Emma wasn't sure if she was ready for it. But she had to try. She had to fit in. As she walked toward the entrance, she could hear the voices of students laughing and talking. It sounded like everyone already knew each other. She couldn't help but feel like an outsider. Her shoes clicked softly against the pavement, and she took a deep breath, telling herself to stay calm. This wasn't going to be so bad, she thought. She just needed to get through the day. Inside the school, the halls were filled with students, rushing to their classes. Emma stood by the lockers, unsure of where to go. She glanced around and saw groups of friends chatting and laughing together, their voices blending into one big noise. Emma felt small and invisible, almost like she didn't belong. Her hands were sweaty as she gripped her books tightly to her chest, her eyes darting from one face to another, hoping someone would notice her, or maybe even smile at her. She walked down the hall, trying to find her locker. The walls were lined with colorful posters and bulletin boards, but none of it felt welcoming. It felt cold, like no one cared who she was or where she came from. Emma bit her lip and kept walking, determined to get through this. But as she passed a group of students, she felt the weight of their stares. Their eyes followed her as if they were waiting for her to do something wrong. It made Emma's skin crawl. She tried to ignore it, walking faster, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. She glanced over her shoulder and saw a group of girls whispering to each other, their eyes fixed on her. At first, Emma thought it was just her imagination. Maybe they were talking about something else, but as she kept walking, the whispers grew, louder, and the girls' heads turned to follow her every move. Emma felt her heart race in her chest. She was sure they were talking about her. She just didn't know why. She reached the end of the hallway and stopped by a row of lockers, taking a deep breath. She needed to calm down. She was just nervous. It was normal for new kids to feel this way. She glanced at the clock on the wall. She had a few minutes before class started, so she decided to head to the cafeteria to grab a snack. Maybe sitting down for a few minutes would help her relax. As Emma made her way toward the cafeteria, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around quickly, expecting to see someone she knew. But it wasn't anyone familiar. It was the group of girls she had seen earlier. They were walking toward her now, their eyes fixed on her like they had a plan. The leader of the group, a girl with dark, curly hair and a scowl on her face, stepped forward. Her name was Stacy, and Emma could tell right away that she wasn't someone to mess with. The other girls trailed behind her, their expressions cold and judgmental. Emma froze. She didn't know what to do. Should she smile? Should she say something? Before she could decide, Stacy spoke up, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Stacy said, her lips curling into a smirk. "The new girl, you must be lost." Emma's heart thudded in her chest. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. I'm just looking for the cafeteria," she said quietly, not wanting to make a scene. Stacy laughed, the sound harsh and mean. "The cafeteria? Yeah, I bet you are." She took a step closer, blocking Emma's path. The other girls snickered behind her. Emma felt trapped. She could feel her palms start to sweat as she tried to take a step back. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want to fight. She just wanted to blend in, to go unnoticed. But now it seemed like she was the target. Stacy's eyes narrowed as she looked Emma up and down. "You don't belong here, do you?" she said, her voice low and menacing. "You're too different. You don't even look like you fit in." Emma's stomach turned. She wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. She couldn't fight back. Not yet. She wasn't sure how to deal with people like Stacy. She had been bullied at her old school, but this felt different. Stacy's eyes were full of challenge, like she was daring Emma to make the first move. Before Emma could even respond, one of the other girls behind Stacy snickered. "I bet she doesn't even know how to act. She's probably just some weird nerd from a different school." Emma's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She wanted to run, to hide, but she couldn't. She didn't want to seem weak. So, she stood. Still, her head held high, though her insides were trembling. Stacy took another step closer. "You should be careful," she warned. "You don't want to mess with us." And with that, she turned around, leading the group of girls down the hallway, leaving Emma standing there, frozen in place. The sound of their laughter echoed in her ears as they disappeared around the corner. Emma stood there for a long moment, trying to calm her racing heart. She wasn't sure if she should be scared or if she was just overreacting, but deep down, she knew something wasn't right. This was only the beginning, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what was about to happen next. The next day, Emma couldn't shake the feeling of unease. It was as if the incident with Stacy and her group of bullies had set a chain of events into motion, and Emma was unsure of how it would all play out. She kept replaying Stacy's words in her mind. "You don't belong here." They echoed through her thoughts, making her question whether she truly fit in at Riverside High. But Emma wasn't one to back down easily. She had made it this far. Life by standing up for herself when things got tough. Sure, it was hard to find her place here, but she wasn't going to let one group of mean girls make her feel small. She had to face this head on. As she walked down the hallway that morning, her nerves tightened. She couldn't help but glance around, wary of any sign that Stacy and her friends might be lurking nearby. She kept her head down, her fingers gripping the straps of her backpack as she made her way to her locker. The moment she reached it, she felt the familiar pressure of eyes on her back. Emma turned slowly, and there they were, Stacy and her group standing just a few feet away, watching her like hawks. Stacy's eyes locked with Emma's. The smirk on her face was still there, but this time, there was something different in her expression, something colder, darker. Emma swallowed, trying to remain calm, but her hands felt clammy. "Looks like the new girl thinks she's special," Stacy said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She took a step forward, making sure everyone else in the hallway could hear her. "But we don't have time for people like you." Emma's heart raced as she tried to think of something to say. She wasn't going to let Stacy get to her, but just as she was about to respond, one of Stacy's friends, Hannah, the tallest girl in the group, pushed past her and stood right in front of Emma. "Think you can just walk around here like you own the place?" Hannah sneered. "You don't belong, new girl." Before Emma could even react, Stacy reached out and shoved her. It was sudden, violent, and left Emma stumbling backward. She caught herself against the locker, a gasp escaping her lips. The hallway grew quiet as a few students glanced over, but no one stepped in to stop it. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to cry out, to scream, but she didn't want to give them the satisfaction. They were enjoying this. She could see it in their eyes. This was their moment of power, and they were savoring every second of it. Stacy stepped closer, a cruel smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I think it's time to teach you a lesson," she said, her voice low and threatening. "You don't just get to walk in here and pretend like we're all supposed to like you." Emma's throat tightened, but she refused to back down. She didn't want to give in to them, not now, not after everything she'd been through. "You're not going to get away with this," Emma said, her voice steady despite the fear racing through her veins. "You can't just push people around like this." Stacy's expression darkened. Without another word, she raised her hand and slapped Emma across the cheek. The sound of the slap echoed through the hallway, and Emma's world seemed to stop for a moment. Her cheek burned from the impact, and she felt a rush of heat spread across her face. The students who had been watching quickly looked away, some pretending they hadn't seen a thing. The silence in the hallway was deafening. For a moment, Emma couldn't move. She was in shock, her hand resting on her cheek where the slap had landed. She was angry, furious, but she also felt a strange calmness wash over her. This wasn't how things were going to end. Stacy and the others expected her to crumble. They expected her to cry, to run off in embarrassment. But Emma wasn't like that. No, she wasn't going to let them have the satisfaction. Emma's fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack. She slowly straightened up, standing tall. Her eyes locked with Stacy's, and for the first time Emma felt a fire inside her. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. "I warned you," Emma said quietly, her voice firm. "You don't know who you're messing with." Stacy's smirk faded slightly, but she didn't back away. She leaned in closer, her voice low and mocking. "Oh, I'm so scared," she sneered. "What are you going to do about it?" Emma didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her fingers trembled, but she forced herself to dial a number. The phone rang a couple of times before someone picked up. "Hello?" A deep voice answered on the other end. Emma held the phone to her ear, her eyes never leaving Stacy's. "Hi, Grandpa. I need you to come to school." Stacy raised an eyebrow, clearly confused. "What's this? Are you calling your mommy?" Emma shook her head, her voice growing colder. "No, my grandfather is Vin Diesel, and he's on his way." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. Stacy's eyes widened as she tried to process what Emma had just said. Emma's calm expression never wavered as she hung up the phone. "You'll regret this," Emma said, turning away from Stacy. She walked down the hall, leaving Stacy and her group frozen in shock. Emma knew Stacy and her friends didn't believe her. They thought it was a joke. But Emma wasn't joking. And very soon, they would learn the hard way that Emma was not someone to mess with. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Emma could feel the weight of Stacy's eyes on her back as she walked away, each step echoing in her ears. She wasn't sure if her words had made an impact, but she knew one thing for certain. Things were about to get a lot more complicated. As she made her way to the cafeteria, Emma's mind raced. She had no idea if her grandfather, Vin Diesel, would actually come to her school, but she hoped he would. She hadn't seen him in years, but her mother always told her that when things got tough, she could count on her family. And right now, Emma needed someone in her corner. The cafeteria was as noisy as ever when Emma walked through the doors. The chatter of students mixed with the clatter of trays and silverware. She spotted a table near the corner and made her way toward it, feeling the eyes of everyone on her. A few students whispered as she passed, no doubt still talking about the scene that had just unfolded in the hallway. Emma sat down at the table and pulled out her lunch. She tried to ignore the whispers, but it was impossible. Her cheek still stung from the slap, and her heart was still racing. She didn't want to cry. She refused to let anyone see her weakness. But the more she thought about what had happened, the more frustrated she became. She was tired of being pushed around, tired of feeling small. As she poked at her sandwich, she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up, expecting to see one of Stacy's friends, but instead a tall figure appeared in the doorway of the cafeteria. It was him, Vin Diesel. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to show up this quickly. The cafeteria fell silent as the students stared, wide-eyed, at the man who had just walked in. Emma could hear the murmurs spreading like wildfire. "Is that Vin Diesel? What is he doing here?" Vin Diesel was wearing sunglasses, a leather jacket, and jeans, looking as cool and confident as ever. He wasn't just an actor, he was a legend. And now he was here, at Riverside High. Emma stood up, her knees feeling weak. She could hardly believe what was happening. Her grandfather smiled at her from across the room, giving her a small wave. He moved toward her with a calm confidence that made everyone in. The cafeteria turned to stare. "Hey, kiddo," Vin said, his deep voice making heads turn. He stood by Emma's table, towering over her like a giant. He wasn't just any grandfather. He was the Vin Diesel. Stacy and her friends were still frozen in place, their mouths agape. Emma could see the shock in their eyes. They hadn't expected this. No one had. Vin took a seat next to Emma, still cool and collected. He didn't seem fazed by the crowd of students now surrounding him. He leaned in and whispered in Emma's ear. "You doing all right?" Emma nodded, still in awe of his sudden appearance. "I didn't think you'd actually come," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've got your back," Vin replied with a smile. Always. The tension in the room was thick. Students were whispering to each other, trying to figure out what was going on. Stacy and her group were still staring at Vin, unable to move. Emma could see their eyes shift between her and him, disbelief written all over their faces. Stacy finally found her voice. She stood up from her table, taking a step toward Vin. Her voice was shaky, but she tried to sound confident. "Who do you think you are, showing up here like that?" she demanded, trying to appear tough. Vin's gaze shifted to Stacy. He didn't look angry, just calm. Very calm. He raised an eyebrow, and his deep voice boomed across the cafeteria. "I think I'm Emma's grandfather, and if you have a problem with that, maybe you should take it up with me." The entire cafeteria fell silent. No one dared to speak. Emma could feel the weight of the moment hanging in the air. Stacy was visibly shaken, her face paling as she tried to regain control of the situation. You're really Vin Diesel?" Stacy stammered, her voice faltering. Vin didn't respond right away. He simply stood up and walked over to Stacy, his presence towering over her. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as they waited to see what would happen next. "Yeah, I am," Vin said coolly, crossing his arms over his chest. "And you're messing with my granddaughter. So here's the thing, Stacy. I don't like bullies, and I don't like seeing my family upset. You and your friends might want to rethink the way you treat people." Stacy was frozen, unable to say anything. Emma could see the panic in her eyes as she realized she had gone too far. The other students in the cafeteria were watching, some with their phones out, recording the scene. It was like something out of a movie. But this wasn't a movie. This was real life. Vin turned to Emma and gave her a reassuring smile. "Don't let people like her get to you," he said softly. "You've got this." Emma's heart swelled with gratitude. She didn't know how to respond, but she knew. One thing for sure, she wasn't alone anymore. Stacy and her friends stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to do. They had never expected this, never imagined that the quiet new girl would have someone like Vin Diesel on her side. They were used to being the ones in control, used to being the ones who intimidated others, but now they were the ones who were afraid. Vin gave one last look at Stacy, a quiet warning in his eyes. "If I ever hear about you bothering Emma again, I won't be so nice next time," he said in a calm but firm tone. With that, he turned and walked toward the exit, his presence still dominating the room. Emma followed him, her heart pounding in her chest. As she stepped out of the cafeteria, she looked back one last time, seeing Stacy and her group standing there, completely silent. The school day seemed to stretch on forever after Vin Diesel's dramatic entrance into the cafeteria. Despite the chaos that had unfolded, Emma couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. She had gone from the target of bullies to the girl with Vin Diesel, her grandfather, on her side. It was surreal. As Emma sat in her next class, she could feel the eyes of her classmates on her. Whispers filled the room, and the energy had completely shifted. She wasn't the new girl anymore. She wasn't the one everyone felt sorry for. Now, she was the girl who had Vin Diesel as her grandfather. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her best friend, Lily. "Is it true? Did Vin Diesel really come to your school?" Emma couldn't help but smile. She quickly typed back, "Yes, he came, and the bullies won't bother me anymore." Before she could send the message, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Emma turned around to find Jake, one of the guys from her class, looking at her with wide eyes. "Hey, Emma, I just wanted to say that was really cool today. What you did with your grandpa. That was awesome," Jake said, clearly nervous, but trying to hide it. Emma blinked, surprised by the compliment. She hadn't expected to hear anything like that from him. "Thanks," she replied, her voice soft but genuine. "I mean, I always thought you were just some quiet new girl, but after today, well, now I see you in a whole new light," Jake continued, a little awkwardly. Emma wasn't sure how to respond. She wasn't used to people standing up for her, or complimenting her, but she wasn't about to let it go to her head either. Before she could say anything else, the bell rang, signaling the end of the class. The students quickly gathered their things and rushed out of the room, but the whispers followed Emma wherever she went. During lunch, Emma sat at a new table, away from Stacy and her group. She was joined by a few students who had noticed her. The day before, and to her surprise, they were all welcoming. There was Sarah, a girl from English class who had always been quiet but had a warm smile, and Daniel, a football player who seemed to have a good sense of humor. "Hey, Emma," Sarah said, smiling at her. "I just wanted to say that I think it's really great how you handled that whole situation with Stacy. You're like the bravest person I know." Emma blushed. She hadn't really done anything special, she'd just called her grandfather, but something about hearing those words from Sarah made her feel good. "Yeah," Daniel chimed in. "Most people would have just backed down, but you didn't. That was epic." Emma smiled softly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Maybe things were starting to look up for her after all. The rest of the lunch period passed quickly, and by the time the bell rang, Emma felt like she had finally found a place where she belonged. Her confidence had grown, and she felt like she had more friends than she had ever had before. But as she walked out of the cafeteria, her eyes locked with Stacy's from across the hallway. Stacy was standing with her group, but there was no sneer on her face this time. She looked worried. Emma felt a strange sense of power as she stared back at Stacy. The bullies had been the ones in control before, but now everything had changed. Stacy and her friends had lost their grip. Emma didn't know what was coming next, but she was ready for it. Just then, Emma's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from her mom. Emma picked it up immediately. "Hey, Mom," she said, brightly. "Hey, honey, I just wanted to check in and see how your day's going," her mom replied, her voice warm and loving. It's going great," Emma said, her eyes scanning the hallway. "Actually, Grandpa came to school today." There was a pause on the other end, and then her mom's voice broke through. "What, your grandfather came to school?" Emma laughed a little nervously. "Yeah, the bullies were bothering me, so I called him. He showed up and now everyone's talking about it." Her mom chuckled softly. "Well, I'm glad he could be there for you. You know you don't have to face things alone, right?" Emma smiled, feeling the love from her mom. "I know, Mom. Thanks, I think things are going to be okay now." After the call ended, Emma felt a strange calmness wash over her. Her life was far from perfect, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like she was in control. Stacy and her friends didn't have the power anymore. Emma had found her voice, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it away. But as the day came to a close, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the bullies weren't done with her yet. She knew it wasn't over, not by a long shot. As she gathered her things and walked toward the exit, she spotted Stacy in the distance, glaring at her. Emma's heart skipped a beat, but she stood tall. She wasn't going to back down. The following day at school felt different. The air was tense. Emma could sense it as soon as she walked through the gates. The students were still buzzing with excitement about Vin Diesel's appearance. But this time, there was something else in the air. Whispers were louder, eyes followed her everywhere, and even the teachers seemed to be giving her second glances. But the worst part was the cold stares she received from Stacy and her friends. Emma could tell they were plotting something. Stacy hadn't looked her way with that smug, confident sneer in a while. Now she was angry. Emma could see it in her eyes. As the bell rang for the first class of the day, Emma entered the classroom, her mind racing. She tried to ignore the whispers around her, but it was impossible. No one could stop talking about what had happened. By lunch, Emma's gut was twisted in knots. She could feel that something was about to happen, something that would either put an end to the bullying for good or make it even worse. She took a deep breath and made her way toward the cafeteria, trying to ignore the eyes that followed her. As she entered the lunchroom, she spotted Stacy sitting with her usual group. The moment their eyes met, Emma could tell that the showdown was about to begin. Stacy had her arms crossed and her expression was cold. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the tension building. Sarah and Daniel were already sitting, at Emma's usual table, and they waved her over. Emma smiled weakly and walked toward them, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to explode. "Hey, Emma," Sarah greeted, her voice cheerful. "How's everything going? Still feeling good after yesterday?" Emma nodded, though she didn't feel as confident as she had the day before. "Yeah, everything's fine. I have a feeling." "Stacy's planning something." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You think she'll try something again?" "I'm not sure," Emma admitted, her voice lowering. "But she looked pretty angry today." Suddenly, the loud clatter of a chair scraping against the floor interrupted the conversation. Emma looked up to see Stacy standing. Her eyes locked on Emma with a glare that could cut through steel. Stacy marched over to their table, and every eye in the cafeteria was on her. "Emma." Stacy's voice was sharp, her words dripping with malice. "We need to talk." Emma felt a chill run down her spine, but she stood up, her hands shaking. She had dealt with bullies before, but this felt different. Stacy was furious, and Emma knew that this wouldn't end with words. "I don't have anything to say to you, Stacy," Emma said, her voice calm, though her heart was racing. "You and your friends need to leave me alone." Stacy's lips curled into a twisted smile. "You think you're so special, don't you? Just because you have Vin Diesel for a grandfather, you think you can walk around here like you own the place. But let me tell you something, Emma. This school is mine, and you're nothing but a joke." Emma's hands clenched into fists. She had heard the hurtful words before, but today something was different. She wasn't going to back down. Not this time. "Stacy," Emma said, her voice steady. "You think you can control me? You think I'm scared of you? I'm not." Stacy's eyes narrowed as she stepped closer to Emma, their faces just inches apart. The tension in the room was so thick, Emma could hardly breathe. The students around them were silent, watching the showdown unfold. "You're not scared?" Stacy scoffed. "You should be." Without warning, Stacy raised her hand, preparing to slap Emma. Emma's heart slammed in her chest. She knew this was the moment. But just as Stacy's hand swung forward, a voice boomed across the cafeteria. "Hey! Stop right there!" It was Mr. Walters, the principal. His booming voice echoed through the room, and every student froze in place. Stacy pulled her hand back in surprise, her eyes widening as Mr. Walters strode toward them. He was tall and intimidating, and his stern expression made everyone uneasy. "Stacy, what do you think you're doing?" Mr. Walters demanded, his voice stern. "You don't get to treat people like this. You've been warned multiple times already, and I won't tolerate this behavior anymore." Stacy's face turned bright red. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. The entire cafeteria was watching, waiting for what would happen next. "I think it's time for you to head to my office, Stacy," Mr. Walters continued. "And I'm calling your parents. This behavior ends now." Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. For once, Stacy wasn't in control. She wasn't the one calling the shots. Mr. Walters had stepped in, and for the first time, Emma felt a glimmer of hope. Stacy stood there, frozen, before she glared at Emma one last time. "This isn't over," she hissed before storming out of the cafeteria with Mr. Walters behind her. The students in the cafeteria slowly began to murmur, the tension finally starting to lift. Emma's heart was still racing, but she felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had stood her ground, and for once, the bullies had lost. Sarah and Daniel both gave Emma a high five. "That was amazing," Daniel said, grinning. "You stood up to her and she backed down." Emma smiled, but her mind was still spinning. She had no idea what the consequences would be for Stacy, but for the first time, she felt like she was on the winning side. As the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, Emma walked out of the cafeteria, her head held high. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't backing down anymore. The battle wasn't over. But Emma had won the first round, and she was ready for whatever came next. The next few days were filled with a strange kind of calm. Stacy had been suspended. Her parents were furious, and the school was buzzing with the aftermath of the incident in the cafeteria. Emma could feel the weight of the situation. But at the same time, there was a sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, she felt free from the constant bullying. But even though Stacy was gone, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was still brewing. The whispers, the stares, and the way people seemed to tiptoe around her. It was all too quiet. The calm before the storm. It was on the third day after the incident that Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Lily. Lily. Hey, Emma. Word on the street is that Stacy's planning her big return. She's been talking about getting back at you. Emma's stomach dropped. She had hoped that Stacy would stay out of her life for good, but deep down she knew it wasn't going to be that easy. The girl was stubborn, and her pride was hurt. Feeling of dread washed over her as she put down her phone. She couldn't go back to the way things were. She had to finish this once and for all. But she wasn't going to let Stacy dictate her life any longer. She had to stay strong. Later that day, Emma walked into her last class of the day, feeling a little nervous. Stacy hadn't been at school since the suspension, but today she was supposed to be back. Emma's hands were clammy, her mind racing. Was Stacy really going to try something again? The bell rang and the students filed into the classroom, chatting and laughing. Emma sat at her usual spot near the back, trying to remain calm, but her heart was pounding in her chest. As she looked around the room, she caught sight of Stacy walking in through the door. Stacy's eyes immediately locked onto Emma's, and Emma could see the anger boiling inside her. Stacy had returned with a vengeance. The teacher, Mrs. Clark, began the lesson, but Emma couldn't focus. Stacy was sitting just 2 rows in front of her, and every time Emma tried to look at the board, she could feel Stacy's eyes on her, burning into her back. Emma had to admit she was scared. Not because she thought Stacy would physically hurt her, but because Stacy was unpredictable. After everything that had happened, Emma knew she couldn't let her guard down. The class continued, and Emma tried her best to keep her mind off of Stacy, focusing instead on the lecture. But every time she glanced over at Stacy, she saw the girl scribbling something in her notebook, her face set in a scowl. Finally, the bell rang, signaling the end of the day. Emma stood up ready to leave, but as she turned toward the door, Stacy's voice cut through the noise. "Hey, Emma, wait up!" Stacy called out, her tone sharp. Emma froze. She had been expecting this. She took a deep breath, turned around, and faced Stacy. "Stacy," Emma said quietly, trying to remain calm. "What do you want?" Stacy stepped closer, her face twisted with a mixture of rage and humiliation. "You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed. "You think you can just walk around here like everything's fine because of your stupid grandfather? Well, I'm not going to let you get away with this. You're nothing without him." Emma felt a surge of anger flood her chest, but she fought to keep her composure. "I didn't need Vin Diesel to stand up for myself," Emma said, her voice steady. "I did that on my own," Stacy scoffed. "No, you didn't. You think you're some kind of hero because of who your grandpa is, but you're just a scared little girl. You'll never be one of us." Emma's eyes narrowed. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. "You know what, Stacy? Maybe I'm not like you. Maybe I don't need to be. But I'm not scared of you anymore. I'm not backing down." For a moment, there was silence. The hallway around them had emptied out, and the only sound was their voices. Stacy's face was twisted with fury, but Emma stood her ground, her heart pounding. "You think you're so much better than me," Stacy sneered. "Well, I'll show you who's in charge around here. I'll make sure you regret crossing me." Emma felt a shiver run down her spine, but she refused to back down. "I'm not afraid of you, Stacy, not anymore." Just then, the door to the classroom opened, and Mrs. Clark stepped out into the hallway. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her gaze shifting between the 2 girls. Stacy quickly straightened up, her face trying to hide the anger that was still there. "No, Mrs. Clark, we were just talking." Emma shot one last look at Stacy, then turned and walked away, her heart still racing. She could feel Stacy's eyes on her, but she didn't look back. She had stood her ground, and that was all that mattered. The next few days passed in relative peace. Stacy didn't make any more moves. and the bullying stopped for good. Emma knew that it wasn't over completely, but she had won. She had proven to herself and to everyone else that she wasn't someone to mess with. Her life was slowly returning to normal, but Emma had learned something important. She didn't need to hide behind anyone. She could stand up for herself, no matter who was trying to bring her down.